There was a research experiment done by a Harvard researcher named Ellen Langer. And she took a group of men in their 70s and 80s to a monastery north of Harvard, about 2 hours north of Harvard. And she charged these men and asked them for 5 days, just for 5 days, to retreat from their lives, to remove the constant stimulation from their external environment that reminded them of who they thought they were, to separate themselves from the people that they know and the places that they go and the things that they do at the exact same time, long enough to pretend that they were 22 years younger. And what Langer did is she set up the conditions in the monastery to help these gentlemen out. She had pictures of the Kennedy brothers and the Cuban Missile Crisis. She had Nat King Cole playing in the background. And she, had all of these cues to help them to pretend to be 22 years younger. Now, before they engaged in the experiment, Langer took some very simple measurements. She measured the men's finger lengths. She measured their toe lengths. She measured their eyesight and their hearing. She measured their height and weight. She measured their range of motion, their gait, and their cognitive ability. And then the men went into this 5-day immersion, and for 5 days they pretended to be 22 years younger. Langer reports at the end of the experiment that she was playing touch football with these men without their canes. When she did the measurements at the end of 5 days, just in 5 days, these men were taller, they lost weight, they could see better, they could hear better, they had greater range of motion, they walked with less of a limp, their finger lengths were longer, their toe lengths were longer, and their cognition improved by 60%. Now here's the question. During your retreat from your life in this beautiful place, who are you pretending to be, or who are you pretending not to be? Because as you separate yourself in this beautiful oasis from everything in your external environment that reminds you of who you think you are, you have an opportunity to change your state of being. You see, the men couldn't say finger lengths get longer, toe lengths get longer, brain work better, body get taller. They couldn't change that with their conscious mind. But they moved into a new state of being. They began to think differently. They began to act differently. And they began to feel differently. And their biology reorganized to a new state of being. Now, your personality creates your personal reality. That's it. And your personality is made up of how you think, how you act, and how you feel. So the present personality who's sitting here today has created the present personal reality called your life. Which means then, if you wanted to create a new personal reality, a new life, you would have to start thinking about what you've been thinking about and change it. Would you agree? Come on, poke the person next to you. Poke them. You would have to begin to become conscious of your unconscious habits and behaviors and modify them. And then you would have to look at those emotions that you memorize that keep you anchored to the past and decide if those emotions belong in your future. You see, most people try to create a new personal reality as the same personality, and it doesn't work. You literally have to become someone else. So you think 60 to 70,000 thoughts in one day. Out of those 60 to 70,000 thoughts that you think in one day, 90% of those thoughts are the same thoughts as the day before. So the same thoughts will always lead to the same choices. The same choices will always lead to the same behaviors. The same behaviors will create the same experiences, and the same experiences will produce the same emotions. And those same emotions will initiate the same thoughts. And your biology, your neurocircuitry, your neurochemistry, your hormonal expression, even your genetic expression, is equal to how you think, how you act, and how you feel. So, would you agree then, as geniuses, of course, that new thoughts should lead to new choices? Yes? And new choices should lead to new behaviors? And new behaviors should create new experiences? And new experiences then should create new emotions, and those new emotions should inspire new thoughts, and that's called evolution. So then, if you believe in the idea that the way you think has some effect on your life, that your thoughts produce some effect on your destiny, then the next most important question is, are you being defined by a vision of the future or a memory of the past? Now, neuroscience says that your brain is organized to reflect everything you know in your life. Your brain is an artifact. It is a record of all the things you've experienced and learned to date. So if you wake up every morning and you get out of bed on the same side of the bed, you shut the alarm clock off with the same finger, you scratch yourself in the same exact way you did yesterday, you slip into your favorite slippers, and then you use the toilet like you always do. Then you get up and you look in the mirror to remember who you are. Then you wash yourself in the same routine way. You dress yourself like everybody expects you to look. You drive to work in the same route, see the same people that push the same emotional buttons, do the things that you've memorized and do so well. Then you hurry up and go home, and hurry up and check your emails, and hurry up and watch your favorite television show, and hurry up and eat, and hurry up and go to bed, so you can hurry up and do it all over again? Let me ask you a question. Did you change at all that day? Because as you see the same people and go to the same places and do the exact same thing at the exact same time, we could say that it's your external environment that's turning on different circuits in your brain, causing you to think equal to everything that you know. And as long as you're thinking in the same way and equal to your environment and everything that you know, what do you keep creating more of? The same reality. So to change then, to truly change, is to think greater than your environment. To think greater than the circumstances in your life. To think greater than the conditions in your world. And every great person in history already knew this. Whether it was William Wallace, or Mahatma Gandhi, or Martin Luther King, or Joan of Arc, they all had a vision. The Wright brothers had a vision of the future. Couldn't see it, couldn't smell it, couldn't taste it, couldn't feel it, but to them it was alive in their minds. So can you believe in a future that you can't see or experience with your senses yet, but you've thought about enough times in your mind that your brain is literally changed to look like the event has already occurred? The latest research on neuroscience and neuroplasticity says it's absolutely possible. You can change your brain just by thinking. And can you fall in love with a future possibility or potential that exists in the quantum field? And can you emotionally embrace that future reality before it's made manifest? To such a degree that your body, as the unconscious mind, begins to believe it's living in that future reality in the present moment, and you're signaling new genes in new ways so that your body begins to change to look like the experience has already occurred? The latest research in epigenetics says it's absolutely possible. So if your brain and body are physically changed by thought alone, to look like the experience has already occurred, there's physical evidence in your body to look like the event has already occurred, then relax. Because the event is going to find you. And it's going to come in a way that you least expect. Now, why does it come in a way that you least expect? Because if you can expect it, it's nothing new. It's got to rock your world. It's got to catch you off guard, and it's got to leave no doubt that what you did inside of you produced some result outside of you. And when you can correlate the changes you've made inside of you with the effect you produced outside of you, you'll pay attention to what you did, and you'll do it again. And that's called human empowerment. And so then, if you're not in the process every single day separating yourself from your external environment, that's what meditation does. By you closing your eyes and disconnecting from your external environment, you're removing the stimulation. You're setting your body down and asking it to no longer do anything to reaffirm its identity. And if you do that properly, you'll have a moment where you'll get beyond time. And in all the research that we've done in the last 2.5 years, I can tell you that you are at your absolute best when you get beyond yourself. We have studied over thousands and thousands of brain scans of people during meditation. And when you get to that elegant moment where you forget about yourself, that is when you're the most powerful. That is when you begin to connect to a greater intelligence. So then, if you're not in the process of creation, then for the most part, your personal reality is creating your personality. And we wind up being victims to the circumstances in our life. And so, when we began to look at people in the state of meditation, over and over again, we saw that when you analyze your life within the emotion that you're feeling, that is a familiar emotion, and those emotions are derived from the hormones of stress, every single time you will make your brain worse. In other words, emotions are the record of the past. And familiar emotions then keep you anchored to the past. So if you're reacting to someone or something in your life and you're emotional, and you don't know how to control your emotional reactions, and those emotions are driving certain thoughts, then for the most part you're thinking in the past. Now, when you're in that state where you are vigilant, or anxious, or aggressive, or frustrated, or impatient, and you're living by that constant state, your body, as the unconscious mind, begins to believe it's in the experience from the past. Because your body does not know the difference between an actual experience in your life that creates an emotion and an emotion that you can create by thought alone. To the body, it's exactly the same. So if thoughts are the language of the brain, and feelings are the language of the body, and how you think and how you feel creates a state of being, and you're waking up every single morning being defined by the familiar feeling that you call you, that familiar feeling then keeps you in the past. So then in order for you to truly change yourself and experience some type of transformation, you have to forget about your body in meditation. You have to forget about your identity. You have to forget about things. You have to get beyond places and get beyond time. You have to go from somebody to nobody. From someone to no one. From something to nothing. From somewhere to nowhere. From some time to no time. And in that place where you truly dissociate from your body, environment, and in time, that is the moment you begin to connect to a greater consciousness. And your self then, the self that is consciousness, begins to merge with a greater consciousness, and the brain starts to work in a more holistic fashion. And so people who begin to the process of meditation, they're moving and they're struggling and they're fatigued and they're having difficulty and pain in their body. That's because 95% of who you are by the time you're 35 years old is a set of memorized behaviors, emotional reactions, beliefs, perceptions, and attitudes that function just like a computer program. You've done something so many times, over and over again, that your body knows how to do it better than your conscious mind. It's 95% of who you are. So now you're going to sit the body down, and the body's been the mind, and the moment you sit it down, what do you think it's going to want to do? It's going to want to get up and do what it knows how to do. And you're saying, stay, stay. And then it settles down for a moment, and then it wants to do something else. And every single time you notice some propensity, some urge, some emotion that comes up in your meditation, and you want to open your eyes and you want to quit, and every time you don't do that, and you settle yourself back down into the present moment, you're reconditioning your body to a new mind. And if you keep doing that over and over again, the animal, the body, will finally surrender to a greater mind. And when that occurs, there is a liberation of energy. And we've measured that energy around people's bodies when they truly slip into the present moment. And when they do that properly, their body is no longer anchored to the past. So habits are actions from the past. A habit is a redundant, automatic, unconscious set of thoughts, behaviors, and emotions that's acquired through frequent repetition. If you keep doing something over and over again, your body will do it automatically. And if feelings and emotions are the end product of past experiences, and you live by the same feelings every single day, and those feelings drive certain thoughts, and those thoughts create certain feelings, and those feelings drive certain thoughts, then your body literally is in the past. And you cannot create a new future holding on to the emotions of the past. So when you settle your body into the present moment during a meditation, and it is angry or impatient or frustrated or discouraged, and you're aware of it, and you keep bringing it back to the present moment, you're liberating your body from those states. And when that occurs, truly, when the body truly relaxes into the present moment, it is no longer living in the past. And the body is liberating energy. So, if feelings and emotions are the end product of past experiences, and you live by the same feelings every single day of your life, does it mean nothing new is happening in your world? Would you agree? Come on, poke the person next to you, please. In other words, if you're going to be defined by a vision of the future instead of the circuits and emotions of the past, wouldn't you agree then that the moment you decide what you want for yourself in your life and you begin to review some future experience that awaits you, the moment you begin to create a picture in your mind, that picture then becomes what we call intention. Intention is getting clear on what you want. Now, when you take that intention and you marry it with an elevated emotion, like joy, or compassion, or love, or gratitude, it's the combination of a clear intention and an elevated emotion that begins to change your biology. Because the moment you combine that clear intention with an elevated emotion, you are moving into a new state of being. And if you can reproduce that same state of being every single day, your body will be conditioned into a vision of the future instead of a memory of the past. The problem with change, though, for most people, the hardest part about change is not making the same choice as you did the day before. And let's just say, I don't know, I'm making this up, but let's just say that you have been complaining and blaming and making excuses and feeling sorry for yourself for 10 years. And you've practiced it so many times that your body knows how to do it better than your conscious mind. It's become a habit. And all of a sudden, in a moment of understanding, you say, okay, today I'm not going to complain anymore. I'm not going to blame anybody. I'm not going to make excuses. I'm not going to feel sorry for myself. I'm just going to quit today. Now remember, you've conditioned the body to be the mind. The moment you stop thinking the same way, you stop acting the same way, and you stop feeling the same way, what do you think happens in the next moment? Just like an addict who's breaking an addiction to some chemical, the body starts to crave those emotional states. It wants its chemical rush because it's modified its receptor sites because you've conditioned it that way. And now the war begins. Because the body now, which has become the mind, wants to return back to its familiar emotional state. So all of a sudden, the body starts sending signals back to the brain. And the next thing you know, you started out with really good intentions. And then in a very short amount of time, you start to hear these voices in your head. And those voices start saying things like, why don't you start tomorrow? Tomorrow's a better day. This doesn't feel right. It's my mother's fault. What's wrong with me? I'll never change. And those are signals coming from the body-mind. And one of the greatest moments in my life is when I realized just because I have a thought doesn't necessarily mean it's true, was the moment I started to become liberated. But if people respond to those thoughts, those voices, as if they're true, consciousness immerses itself back into the program and we return back to the old self. But the moment you're conscious of those unconscious thoughts and you would never let them slip by your awareness again, the moment you become so aware of your automatic behaviors that you would never go unconscious again, and the moment you've sat with yourself and looked at all of those emotions that bring you to a lower denominator, and you won't let yourself be defined by those emotions, you just stepped into the river of change. When you step into that river of change, the first thing that happens is it's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel unfamiliar. It's going to be unpredictable. And you are going to feel like it's unknown. Now, most people, the moment they start feeling that discomfort or they can't predict what it's going to feel like, the thought that they create in their mind from their body causes them to make the same choice, which leads to the same behavior that creates the same experience, which produces the same emotion, and they always say the same thing. This feels right. Now, that feels familiar. Crossing the river of change from the old self to the new self is the biological, is the neurological, is the chemical, addictive, hormonal, genetic death of the old self. The old self is literally biologically dying. It's transforming. And most people will say, well, I can't predict my future in this place. Well, that unknown, that void, that is the perfect place to create from. And the best way to predict our future is to create it, not from the known, but from the unknown. And so when people become conscious that they have been living with guilt for the last 20 years, and they step into that river, and they would rather feel guilt than feel nothing. Or they become conscious that for 10 years they've been judging themselves and judging others, and it was such an unconscious program that they weren't even aware of it because they were too distracted from their environment. Now, greatness is born because that person then begins to take ancient knowledge and information, coded information in scriptures, and they start to realize that all that philosophical, theoretical information that they learned is to do something with it. And they begin to wrestle with the old self and the new self, and they begin to think and select, what thoughts do I want to fire and wire in my brain? And they put their attention behind those. And what behaviors will I demonstrate when I open my eyes? Who will I forgive? How will I serve? How will I give? And the mere act of thinking about what you're going to do in a meditation, the process of rehearsing what you're about to do, the research shows that you begin to install the neurological circuits in your brain to look like the event has already occurred. You are priming your brain into the future. Now your brain is no longer a record of the past. Now it is a map to the future. And if you keep practicing that every day, taking philosophical information and planning what you're going to do with it, you begin to create neurological networks that become a hardware program transformed into a software program. It becomes automatic, and your brain is already warmed up for the day. And if you can say to yourself, I am not going to get up from this meditation until I'm in an elevated state. And your body is raging, and it's impatient, and it's frustrated, and you are not giving in to the body as the mind. And you are teaching your body emotionally what it feels like to have compassion. You are teaching your body what it feels like to be invincible, to be uncompromising, to have gratitude, to be fearless. And you are literally selecting new genes and new ways ahead of the actual event. If you get up with a clear intention and an elevated emotion, and you are feeling differently than when you sat down, you are in a new state of being. And a new state of being is a new personality. And a new personality walks into a new personal reality. And just like those men in the monastery that pretended that they were 20 years younger, you're in a new state of being, and your biology begins to reorganize to a new mind. So all of this information that you are learning at this beautiful place is philosophical, theoretical, spiritual information, void of experience. But if you take this information and you are serious about it, and you begin to apply it in your life, you begin to personalize it, you begin to demonstrate it, it means then you're going to have to modify your behaviors in some way and do something differently. Now, if you change your actions and you do something differently, and you get your behaviors to match your intentions, and your actions equal to your thoughts, you get your mind and body working together, you're going to walk into a new experience. Now, when you're in the midst of an experience, all of your 5 senses plug you into the environment. And in that experience, as you begin to embrace the event, all of that sensory data rushes back to your brain through those 5 different sensory pathways. The moment that information reaches your brain, jungles of neurons begin to organize themselves into networks. The moment those neurons string into place, they reinforce the philosophical information and enrich the brain. But the side effect of that experience produces a chemical. And that chemical is called a feeling or an emotion. And since feelings and emotions are the end product of experience, when you feel emotions, you begin to catalog that experience into long-term memory. So when you read the book on leadership, when you read the book on being a patient parent, When you read the book on success, when you read the book on forgiveness and compassion, and you actually modify your behaviors and you have that experience and you feel compassion, you feel forgiveness, you feel like a leader, you feel like a patient parent, now you are teaching your body emotionally and chemically to understand what the mind has intellectually understood. So knowledge is for the mind and experience is for the body. And in that moment, you are embodying knowledge. The word is becoming flesh, and you're signaling new genes and new ways because it's new information from your environment. But it's not enough to do it once. You have to be able to repeat the experience. You have to be able to do it over and over again. You have to be able to do it at will so many times that you neurochemically condition your body to know how to do it as well as your conscious mind. And if you've done it enough times, now that your body knows how to do it as well as your mind, or the mind and body merge as one, now you're in a state of being. It's innate in you. It's who you are. You've done it so many times that you no longer have to consciously think about it. You know how you do it. You just don't know how you know how. And that's when it begins to become visceral. And it begins to create a state of being. So our job then, in all of this, is to go from philosopher to initiate to master. From mind to body to soul. From knowledge to experience to wisdom. From thinking to doing to being. From information to application to transformation. And we have all the neurological and biological machinery to do this. The problem in our culture is that most people wait for crisis or trauma or disease or diagnosis to finally make up their mind to change. But you can learn and change in a state of pain and suffering, or you can learn and change in a state of joy and inspiration. And because information is so readily available on the planet right now, I'm happy to say that so many people are choosing the latter. So you've retreated from your life for a few days or a few weeks or a few months to reinvent a new self. And there's great research to prove so many wonderful benefits of meditation. There's a great research study that I just read out of Calgary University with women with breast cancer. And they divided them into 3 different categories. 88 women. In the first category, they asked them to practice finding the present moment in meditation and to practice yoga for 8 weeks. The second women, they were broken out into social groups, social support groups, and they were to address their emotional states and the challenges and adversity and blocks that they had and support each other in changing. The third group went to a 6-hour stress class. Now, there are little shoestrings on the end of the DNA called telomeres. And I think of telomeres like candle wicks. And every time a cell divides, the telomere gets a little shorter, and the shorter the telomere is, the closer you are to death. Now, when they measured these women's telomeres, the women that did yoga and meditation for 8 weeks had no change in their telomeres at all. Their body was in stasis. People who were in community and supporting each other, their telomeres stayed exactly the same. And the people who just got the intellectual information about stress but never did anything with it, their telomeres shortened in 8 weeks. If you take a group of stressed out executives that are high cortisol levels, they have no control of their body or their emotional states, and you teach them meditation, you teach them yoga, and you teach them how to relax. That in 6 weeks, 20 minutes of meditation, they regulate 1,561 new genes. They turn on over 800 genes for growth and repair in their body, and they turn off about 700 genes for inflammation and cortisol production. And that genes are like Christmas tree lights. They're turning on and off all the time. And every time you do something new, every time you think a new thought, every time you make a new choice, every time you create a new experience that produces a new emotion, you change your biology. The people who actually practiced meditation and did that same experience regulated 2,200 new genes. So don't think that just by coming here and going through this rigorous training for those of you who are becoming certified isn't changing your biology. Don't think by waking up at 4 in the morning and doing something different and having a passion to apply this isn't changing your genetic expression. Don't think when you sit in a lecture in this place and learn something new and can repeat it that isn't producing physical changes in your brain. Don't think by demonstrating a new behavior or standing or sitting in asana or learning a new posture isn't changing the integrity of your genetic biology. That when you give people sound information and people begin to understand what that information means, every time you learn something new, you make new synaptic connections in your brain. That's what learning is. And the Nobel Prize laureate Kandel in the year 2000 found that when people learned one bit of information, just one bit of information, they doubled the number of connections in their brain from 1,300 connections to 2,600 connections. One new bit of information. But if they didn't repeat that information, if they didn't revisit it, if they didn't review it, if they didn't contemplate on it, those circuits pruned apart in hours or days. So then, if learning is making new synaptic connections, then remembering is maintaining and sustaining those connections. So if you give people information and they can learn it and understand it, and then they can repeat it, now they're wiring that information in their brain, and they're beginning to create neurological networks to prepare them for the experience. Now, if you give them some instruction and you show them how to do it, if they get their behavior to match their intention and they follow directions, they should have some type of transformation. Some type of transformation. And what we've been doing for the last 2.5 years is we've been measuring transformation. And if I could measure that transformation in brainwave studies and heart rate monitors and the energy in the room and energy around people's bodies and genetic expression, we've measured all of those things. And common people around the world are doing the uncommon. They're healing themselves of very, very rare conditions. They're healing others. They're letting go of past scars and wounds that keep them in the past. They're creating miraculous experiences in their life. They're stepping into dimensions and understanding that they're not a limited being living a limited life. And so, I want to finish this evening by telling you a story. A few years ago, I was in this very ashram. And I was walking to my room, and I met a woman on the path. And she was walking with a walker. And I went to walk around her, and she took the walker and went like that. And I stopped and I looked up at her, and she said, I saw you in that movie, What the Bleep. I said, oh, thanks. And I went to go around there, and she said, I don't think you can help me to heal myself. I said, so be it. And I went to go around there, and she said, but I came all this way to listen to you talk. I said, okay. You want to walk with me? And she was very upset because she needed special conditions, a special room, special treatment. And she was the type of person that was very attractive. She was well groomed, and you wouldn't think that there was anything wrong with her. But I made my way to the picnic tables with her, and she told me that she had a condition called polycystic fibrodysplasia. Now, polycystic fibrodysplasia is a genetic condition, and once the gene is signaled, most of the time, the doctors will tell you that you're going to live with it the rest of your life. Now, what polycystic fibrodysplasia is the gene turns on in the bone, and when the gene turns on in the bone, it starts to make a very cheap protein. And because of that, the bone loses its scaffolding, it loses its structure, and the side effect of that is spontaneous fractures. Now, this is a 38-year-old woman, and she's had 17 fractures in her femur. First time she realized she had a broken bone, she limped around the high school campus for 1 year. And it never occurred to her to get an x-ray because she didn't have a trauma. So then she went to a series of doctors. I think it was about 8 or 9 doctors. And all the doctors wanted to put a pin in her leg. But the last doctor she saw said if you put a pin in your leg, then it could break below the pin or above the pin, and you're going to have multiple surgeries, and the bones are going to get more weak. So she decided not to have the surgery, and she went to all these specialists, and they did all these type of injections, but she kept having fractures, and she used to weigh her groceries, because if the groceries were too heavy, she was afraid that she was going to have a fracture. Now, it required her having special attention. She needed to have a special cargo elevator to go up and down hotels, and she needed special ways to get to bed, and she had all these special conditions. She didn't want to stand in line, and she was difficult to be around because she had to control everything in her environment. Now, when she was a child, her father was abusive. And her father would come home a few times a week and beat his children. Now, children's brainwaves, the first 2 years of their life, they're in delta. They're asleep with their eyes open. From the ages of 2 to 6, your brainwaves change into theta. And so we could say that for the first 6 years of a child's life, all the information that they're experiencing from their environment is going into the subconscious unedited. It's encoding. And because most of the time children have all of their attention on their inner world, when they have an experience and they feel differently chemically or emotionally, they wake up and pay attention to who's causing it. In her case, this was her father. And so in time, she began to anticipate these events. And it was those highly charged emotional events, emotions of fear and anxiety and pain and suffering and anger and aggression. All of those emotions of guilt are created from the stress hormones. And the stress hormones push the genetic buttons that create disease. So over a series of exposures to the same violence, and then the vigilance and worry that the future was going to happen again, as she began to think about the event happening again, she began to produce the same emotion before the event occurred, and she was knocking her brain and body out of balance by thought alone. And her body, as the unconscious mind, was living in the future based on the past. And it was the continuous emotional state that began to push the genetic button that created her disease of polycystic fibrodysplasia. In other words, she manifested weakness. She manifested vulnerability in her bones, biologically. And so now she comes to some of our workshops after she leaves this beautiful place. And she was very difficult as a person. My staff cringed when they saw her. And she walked with a walker, and she was angry, and she needed special attention and special food and special this and special that. All of it because she wanted to control her environment, because she was afraid if she was out of control, what would happen. And she came to event after event after event. Every single time I noticed when she came, she walked a little differently. Within a year, she was walking with a cane, and she caught my attention. 9 months later, I see her not walking with a cane at all. A few months after that, she's bouncing around, walking with everybody with no cane at all. And she approaches me and she said, I just came from my specialist. And, of course, this is the most common thing people say. You're not going to believe this. The specialist took an x-ray of where the fractures were in my femur, and they can't even find any evidence of any fractures. Now, your genes make proteins. Your body's a protein-producing machine. And every single day, she made the decision that she would not get up from her meditation the same person who sat down. She was going to get up, falling in love with life. For no apparent reason, she was going to surrender her bitterness and her resentment and begin to teach her body emotionally what it would feel like to have a wonderful life. And every day, she turned the battleship around and she was knocking on the genetic door, because emotions, powerful, elevated emotions, begin to signal new genes in new ways, turning on different Christmas tree lights, which make new proteins. So at the end of that period where there was no evidence of fractures, I knew her body was moving out of the past. And we had an advanced workshop, and she showed up, and she came up to me and she said, I went for my test, and my markers are elevated. What is wrong? She said, I should be getting better. There's no evidence of a fracture, but my blood values show the disease is active. And I grabbed her and I pulled her in close and I said, your body's living in the past. It hasn't caught up. Keep crossing the river. Come on, keep crossing the river. And she went back into her life. She continued to change the way she spoke. She continued to change the way she acted. She no longer wanted any special attention. She no longer allowed those emotions to bring her to a lower level. And she said, every day I'm going to give thanks for life, and I'm going to get up as if my prayers are already answered. And the emotional signature of gratitude means the event has already occurred. And she was teaching her body emotionally what it would feel like. All of a sudden we get this email. And of course the first line of the email is, you're not going to believe this. She said, I went to my doctors at Mount Sinai Hospital. I was so happy with myself. I was so in love with life. I was so satisfied with who I was that I walked in there, peed in the cup, they took my blood, I gave thanks for it, I walked out of there, I could care less if I had the disease. I felt so whole, so complete, that I didn't care if I had the disease any longer. And a week later they called her up and they said to her, you are normal. But she was no longer the identity that was connected to her disease. She was no longer living in her past. The fear, the emotion no longer kept her there. And she said to me, my disease and my father treating me that way was my greatest teacher, because I am no longer living by those emotions. And I said to her, memory without the emotional charge is called wisdom. And that's the name of the game here. And so I was in Baltimore, Washington, D.C. a few months ago, and I said to her, hey, you want to stand up in front of the audience? She had come to the event, and tell the audience the story so that they could hear that's possible. You know what she said to me? She said, I don't even remember the story. I don't even remember that person. You see, the personality that she was in that moment was a different personality. The disease existed in the old self, in the old personality. She literally became someone else. And every single day, because it took years to signal the gene to create the disease, she was passionate about it every day. She understood what she was doing. She assigned meaning to it, and she changed who she was. And I have read hundreds of stories of people that have healed themselves of all kinds of conditions. And I can tell you, Over and over again, it's the same theme. They reach a point where they're so whole, they're so happy with themselves, they're so in love with life that they could care less if they have the disease. And that's the moment it goes away. So then, we shouldn't wait for our healing to feel whole. We shouldn't wait for our success to feel empowered. We shouldn't wait for our new lover to feel love. We shouldn't wait for our money to show up to feel abundance. We shouldn't wait for the mystical moment to feel awe. That's the old model of reality of cause and effect. Waiting for something outside of you to change how you feel inside of you. The Newtonian model of reality. The quantum model of reality is about causing effects, which means then you have to feel awe for the mystical moment to find you. You have to feel empowered for your success to show up. You have to feel abundance to be wealthy. You have to feel whole for your healing to occur, and you have to be in love before your lover ever shows up. That is the quantum model of reality of causing and effect. Thanks.